So the Haftarah of last Shabbat was taken from the book of Samuel, and the Ark, sometimes called the Ark of the Covenant, but not always, featured very prominently in that Haftarah. And it set me thinking about the complex history of the Ark and how it appears in different guises, you might almost say, in the various books of the Bible. So I thought it might be of interest to review some of the relevant texts and see if we can gain some picture of what it meant and other features. So that's the topic, a very different kind of topic, but I hope it will be of some use. So it's divided into questions, because these are the questions that one hears, I think, most commonly. First question, what did the Ark look like, if we want to try and picture it? There's a very detailed description in the book of Exodus of a gilded ark with cherubs on the lid, etc. And that's the one that's often illustrated, and that is the one that you see in films about the discovery or non-discovery of the Ark. Whether it's still extant, whether it really is holed up somewhere in Ethiopia, who knows? All kinds of claims, but maybe when we finish tonight, we'll have a different way of looking at it. So, descriptions. First one comes from Deuteronomy, and we read that one very carefully in the English. At that time, the Lord said to me, this is Moses speaking, cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and you shall also make a wooden ark. Now, this verse alone needs certain comments. Number one, like the first. This is the narration that Moses is presenting to the people, and he covers a lot of ground. So he talks to them about the original 2 tablets on which were inscribed the 10 commandments. And then he tells them what happened to those 2. And now at this point, he's describing the replacement stones and how they came about. Second point, it says here, come up to me on the mountain. The mountain. Which mountain do you think this was? It's important to identify it. The mountain is called Horeb, because in Deuteronomy, as we all know, the revelation happened on Mount Horeb. The only mention of Sinai in the whole book of Deuteronomy is chapter 33, where it says, Hashem mis-Sinai ba. God came from Sinai. Sinai was not the place of the theophany. Horeb was. So the mountain is Horeb. Let's go on. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke in pieces, and you shall put them into the ark. So Moses continues, so I made an ark of acacia wood, and cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and went up the mountain, taking the tablets with me. Then, in the same writing as before, he wrote down the 10 words which the Lord has spoken to you out of the fire upon the mountain on the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them to me. I turned and came down the mountain, and I put the tablets in the ark that I had made, and there they have remained, as the Lord commanded me. Now, I think this is sufficient to give us a picture of what the ark looked like. Acacia wood. Gold never came anywhere near it. No ornaments whatsoever, and certainly no cherubs. It's the simplest of simple. The one thing that perhaps we should supply, which is not stated explicitly, is that it probably had a lid, because the word Aron, as opposed to, say, teba, usually is a box with a lid. How do we know this? Because the same word was used of coffins. Of Joseph it says, Vayisem ba'aron Mitzrayim. And we know, because many of them survived, in Egypt they're buried in coffins with quite elaborate lids very often. And therefore, we have a right to assume that the Aron had a lid. But that's about all. The only material was acacia wood, made by Moses himself. And we also know that he made it before he went up the mountain. So that when he came down with the 2 tablets, he deposited them in that ark that he had made. We translate Aron ark, although it could be translated simply casket or box or any other word. It's a fairly neutral term. Now, I want to add something here from the Talmud. It's a very extraordinary passage in the Talmud, in Tractate Bava Kama. Maybe next time, if we get another class on this topic, then we will go into greater depth as regards to what the rabbis thought about it. But this one comment, I think, is apropos here. Because it says in these verses, and it emphasizes that what was written on the second set of tablets was identical to what was on the first. And it's so stressed. Please pay notice to this. God says to Moses, I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets. That's in verse 2. And then in verse 4, again, Vayichtov al halochot kamichtav harishon. So there's no room for any doubt as to whether they were or were not identical, the 2 sets. And this is where a passage in the Talmud is so problematic. But I'm going to tell you about it because what gave rise to it is even more extraordinary. Someone asked the question, why is it that in the first Decalogue, we call it the first because it appears first in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, the word Tov does not appear. In the commandment about honoring father and mother, it says, so that your days will be long. But in the Deuteronomic Decalogue, as we all know, it says something else, something additional. It says, so that your days shall be long and it will go well with you. Lema'an ya'arichun yamecha u'lema'an yitav lach. There's no lema'an yitav lach in the first Decalogue as described in Exodus. So this, of course, created a great, I would say, headache for commentators, except Ibn Ezra, of course, who said, don't worry about it. It is the thrust of the message that is always preserved, and don't try and be a literalist. You can't be, because if you read carefully, you'll see that things change. They're reported slightly differently each time. And that tells us that we should not be excessively literal about everything. There are places where we should be, but not all the time. And therefore, don't worry. Think of the Decalogue as a message that later was put into words, and the words could vary. We saw this also with the Psalm 18, which is the Psalm of David. So in the book of Psalms, it's written one way, and what we assume to be the same psalm appears also in the book of Samuel. And there's a lot of divergence, a lot of discrepancies between these two. Of course, ArtScroll always has an answer, and notoriously, I will say, has a comment and says, very likely one he sang in his youth, and then he sang a different version in his old age. And that's why we have two. It's typical of those who have to harmonize. And in this case, when this question was asked in the Talmud, so this is how it was answered eventually. The first tablets were destined to break, and they didn't have the word Tov. On the second one survived, and they had the word Tov. Now, obviously, whoever reads this passage in the Talmud is blown away by it, because the question was okay, saying the Berot, saying there's a difference in the two versions of the Decalogue. But the answer is telling you that one was written on the first and the other version was written on the second, which gives the lie to what it says actually in the Torah. And this is not the only place. In Exodus, we have the same thing, this emphatic repetition that it's exactly the same. What was on the second is what was on the first. And yet the Talmud says no. The two Decalogues, one was on the first set and the second one was not identical. There were, of course, that was not the only change. There are many, many changes. So if you say that the Deuteronomy's Decalogue is what was written on the second stone, then it's not just Yitavlah, as we know. There's so many other variations between the two versions, correct? There's Lo Titaveh only in one. Okay. I needed to mention that because it highlights the great importance that these verses give to the fact that they were in fact identical, to actually repeat it twice. Okay. Of course, the answer, the Talmud needed to harmonize at all costs and therefore came up with this idea that they were written on the first and on the second. That's the simple answer, because they were so desperate. How can you have two versions of the Decalogue that are irreconcilable? So that was the only way out. That's what harmonization does to people. It is very destructive. But anyway, second thought. This is talking about King Solomon's temple. In the inner shrine, he made two cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. Each wing of the cherubim was 5 cubits long, and from wingtip to wingtip was 10 cubits. Similarly, the second cherub measured 10 cubits. The two cherubim were alike in size and shape, and each 10 cubits high. He put them within the shrine at the furthest recess, and their wings were outspread, so that a wing of the one cherub touched the wall on the one side, and a wing of the other touched the wall on the other side, and their other wings met in the middle, and he overlaid the cherubs with gold. So King Solomon made 2 freestanding cherubs, very, very tall, 10 cubits high, and he stood them in the shrine. Now there's more about King Solomon's temple, and that's going to be source number 3. Then the priests brought in the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to its place, the inner shrine of the house, the Holy of Holies, beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark. They formed a screen above the ark and its poles. The poles projected, and their ends could be seen from the holy place immediately in front of the inner shrine, but from nowhere else outside. They are there to this day. There was nothing inside the ark but the 2 tablets of stone which Moses had deposited there at Horeb, the covenant which the Lord made with the Israelites when they left Egypt. So you can see that there are some commonalities, or many commonalities, between this description and what Moses himself described in Deuteronomy. Most clearly, we have Horeb. Here it's named. In Deuteronomy, it was named so often that in the passage we read, it just said the mountain. There was no other mountain on which any religious event took place. So that's one commonality. The other is that the actual Aron, as far as we can tell, was the simple acacia wood Aron. Yes, he had cherubs, but they were freestanding. They had nothing to do with Aron. They were there for decoration and maybe as a kind of screen. Another thing, another detail that emerges here, which was not mentioned at all in Deuteronomy, that is that there were poles or staves. Which makes sense because they were carrying it, and we assume that there were staves attached to the sides so that they could put them on their shoulders and carry them. But that's an assumption. And that's influenced by other descriptions, which we will come to in due course. But we shouldn't overread the text. But poles are mentioned for sure. And they were absent from the story in Deuteronomy. So it may be this is something King Solomon added. What were they made of? All this, we're left in the dark. Okay. Source number 4 comes from Exodus. Make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and put a band of gold all round it. Put into the ark the tokens, which I shall give you. We're going to deal with this word tokens in a moment. Make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1 cubit and a half wide. Make 2 gold cherubs of beaten work at the ends of the cover, one at each end. Make each cherub of one piece with the cover. They shall be made with wings outspread, pointing upwards, and shall screen the cover with their wings. They shall be face to face, looking inwards over the cover. Put the cover above the ark, and put into the ark the tokens that I shall give you. So this diverges considerably from what we've seen so far. Yes, again, it's made of acacia wood, but it's overlaid inside and outside with gold. It has a gold band. The lid is also gilded and has cherubs which are made of a piece. They're beaten out of the same piece of gold. They're part and parcel of the lid. They're not freestanding, as in the story of King Solomon. Something called the tokens are to be put inside. What are the tokens? Both in Deuteronomy and in Kings talks about the luchot, which were given on the mountain. That's what was put inside. Here it says the tokens. Do we know what they are? Commentators tell us that we should look at a verse at Exodus 31:18, another one at 32:15, and a third one at 34:29. Why are these of interest and relevance? Because in each of those places, it refers to the luchot as luchot ha'edut. Never are they called luchot ha'edut in Deuteronomy. Only in these priestly texts are they called luchot ha'edut. And so the commentators make a connection and say edut is shorthand for luchot ha'edut. Well, why couldn't they say luchot ha'edut? Why does it just say edut? Well, that's the best we can do. And that is generally assumed that the edut is another name for luchot ha'edut, and luchot ha'edut are yet another name for the luchot, which are referred to in Deuteronomy. Now we come to the next question. What was its name? Has anyone thought about that? The names are very significant. So our first source comes from Numbers 10:35. Whenever the ark began to move, Moses said, "Up, Lord, and may thy enemies be scattered, and those that hate thee flee before thee." It's just called the ark, without any further elaboration. This is thought to be a very ancient poem, and it has found its way into the liturgy as well, when the Torah is carried. In many congregations, they recite this verse. And it's an extremely important verse for many reasons. Not only because the Aron is just called Aron and nothing else, so it's of great historical interest, but also it's a great moral message here. That this is also discussed actually in the introduction to a certain prayer book. This very point, that when Moses prays for the enemies to be neutralized, he doesn't ask God to kill them. He says, let them be scattered. Because if they're scattered, it can do less harm. When bad people get together, they're a much greater threat. Just as when good people get together, they can do far more good very often than any one individual can do alone. That's why the rabbis introduced the idea of a minyan, saying that a group very often can be more beneficial because they can do more together when they pool their energies and their resources. Let them flee. I don't want them to be killed. This is consonant with all the prayers of Moses. But that's a discussion for another day. We're not discussing prayers now. Second source, Deuteronomy 31:9. Moses wrote down this Torah and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. So here it's not called simply the Aron, but Aron Berit Hashem. And this title recurs in Deuteronomy and in many other parts of the Bible, except in the priestly Torah. And the next verses come from the priestly Torah, and you will see that the name is quite different. Exodus 26:33. Hang the veil below the fasters and bring the ark of the tokens inside the veil. Thus the veil will make a clear separation for you between the holy and the holy of holies. Edut. So we saw that Moses was told in the earlier verse, in the ark you will put the tokens, the edut, which I shall give you. And now the Aron, the ark itself, is called the ark of the tokens, of the edut, not Aron Habrit. Again, at 40:21, the same appellation. He brought the ark into the tabernacle, set up the veil of the screen, and so screened the ark of the tokens. So now no one can tell you there is one standard name. There isn't. It's Aron Habrit, and then finally in the priestly Torah, Aron HaEdut. There's one place outside the priestly Torah where that word is used, Aron HaEdut, but many people think that was changed. It's not original in that place, but I'm not going into that now because we're not doing lower Bible criticism. But in spite of that one incident, we can say that Aron HaEdut is distinct, and it's one of the hallmarks of this part of the Bible that we call the priestly Torah. We call it the priestly Torah because it is distinct in its language, in its vocabulary, in its theology, and this is one of those hallmarks. Wherever you see Aron HaEdut, you will see all the other hallmarks of the priestly Torah come together and converge. So there can be no mistake. Next question, who carried it? In that Haftarah last week, there was a lot about the ark being carried and transported. So it's not an insignificant question to ask who carried it. So we start with Deuteronomy 10:8. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to attend on the Lord and minister to him, and to give the blessing in his name until this day. So this is very clear. The tribe of Levi. The entire tribe. Now, of course, in Deuteronomy, the tribe of Levi are the priests. The whole tribe, they were all priests. The division between Kohanim and Leviim doesn't exist in Deuteronomy, right? Nowhere. And this verse makes that pretty clear, as do many other verses. Because who blesses the people? In the priestly Torah, it says, speak to Aaron and his sons, they will bless the people. And in Deuteronomy, it says many times, not just here, that the tribe of Levi are charged with this duty to bless the people. And it says it here again, because they are the priests. And they carry the ark, and they stand before the Lord to serve him. So they do the service in the sanctuary. They are, for all intents and purposes, priests. Again, in Deuteronomy 31:25, Moses gave this command to the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. Now we come to the book of Joshua. To the priests he said, lift up the Ark of the Covenant and pass in front of the people. So they lifted up the Ark of the Covenant and went in front of the people. So in the book of Joshua, he calls them Kohanim. Nevertheless, they are the same kind of functionaries as far as we know. They are priests. Again, in the priestly Torah, it's very different. Because in the priestly Torah, as you know, the tribe of Levi is divided. There are what you might call the semi-lay Levites, who are the lower class, and then one clan within the tribe of Levi called the Aaronites, and they are priests, and they have the exclusive monopoly on the priesthood. And within the other clans, who are now called Levites, priests are not called Levites anymore, they're divided into three. Kehat is one, Gershon is another, Merari is the third. And they are described at the beginning of the book of Numbers. And when it comes to the third group, which are called the Kohathites, this is what it says about them. They were in charge, meaning the sons of Kehat, they were in charge of the ark, the table, the lampstands, and the altars, together with the sacred vessels used in their service, and the screen with everything needed for its maintenance. The other two had different responsibilities, such as the actual walls and beams and planks of the tent itself, and the wedges and the ropes. And then yet others had what you might call secondary appurtenances. That's what they transported. And Kehat had, as we'll see in a moment, what was considered the most essential furnishings. Now we come, this is source number 5. This is the responsibility of the Kohathites in the tent of meeting, the most sacred objects. When the camp is due to move, Aaron and his sons shall come and take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of the tokens with it. Over this, they shall put a covering of porpoise hide, and over that again a violet cloth, all of one piece. They shall then put its poles in place. So we recognize the poles from the book of Kings. It also spoke of the ark having poles. And here it tells them when they're about to move, they should attach the poles to the ark. Then it goes on. Once Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the sacred equipment, when the camp is due to move, the Kohathites shall come to carry. Let them not touch sacred things and die. These are the load of the Kohathites in the tent of meeting. So now we know who has the load and who carries these things. These things, including the ark, are carried by this clan of Levites called the Kohathites, not priests. Incidentally, you may be wondering, what are the Kodesh and Kelea Kodesh? In the Hebrew, in the verse, it says, they will come to cover the Kodesh and Kol Kelea Kodesh. This has puzzled many commentators. Rashi says, Kodesh refers to the ark and the altar, and Kelea Kodesh, the lampstand and other vessels. How did Rashi come to make this distinction? So there are many theories. Many say because there are obviously two categories here. And the Mizbeach in one place is called Kodesh Kodashim. So, and the other appurtenances are not described that way. And the Aron is situated in the Holy of Holies. So Rashi decided that when you say Kodesh without further elaboration, you're referring to those two things which have a doubly holy, if you like, identity or status. And that's why he thought that the Kodesh referred to the Aron and the altar. But we don't really know for sure. There are obviously two categories here, and that's as good a guess as any. So now, if someone asks who carries, we could say it all depends whom you ask. According to Deuteronomy, it is the priests who are always called the Levites, because it's the same thing, they're interchangeable. The tribe of Levi were the priests in Deuteronomy. And if you ask these verses in Numbers, will tell you no, it was one clan of the Levites called Bnei Kehat. The priests did not carry these things. Lastly, Chronicles. This is a curious sort of hybrid text. It says, when the elders of Israel had all come, the Levites carried the ark. They took up the ark and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings of the tent. The Levitical priests took them up. First, he says, the Levites carried the ark. And then he says, they took up the ark and the tent of meeting. The Levitical priests took them up. So why does he have to first say the Levites and then the Levitical priests? I think it would take too long to go into all the different theories. But there's obviously something going on here, because the chronicler had the books of Samuel, he had Deuteronomy, he had the book of Kings. He also had other sources, and he also had an agenda. So he had a lot to contend with. I say him because some people don't like it. They say, how do you know the chronicler was a man, not a woman? I say, I don't know if it was an individual at all. It may have been a team that was doing it. We don't know. That is a mystery, because it's not stated anywhere in the book. So we just say the chronicler. Why did he put first the Levites and then the Levitical priests. One of the, I would say, feasible explanations is that he had two sources. In one source, it said the Levitical priests. This was a Deuteronomic source. And he may have had Deuteronomy itself, where it says the Levites carried the ark. We saw that. But the problem for the chronicler was that in his day, the word Levites didn't mean priests. So he probably copied from Deuteronomy, the Levites carried the ark. And in Deuteronomy, it really meant the priests. And then elsewhere he found, wait a minute, the priests carry the ark. So therefore he said the Levitical priests took them up. So by saying the Levitical priests, he is compromising and saying, yes, the Levites who were priests. But we don't know this for sure. All we can say is the wording is strange. So we've seen, in short, that there are irreconcilable traditions regarding who had the portage of the ark. Some other vessels and utensils as well, but we're interested in the ark. So now Maimonides wrote his book of Mitzvot. He had a problem. How is he going to reconcile? So the reason we have this quote from Maimonides is for this reason, because it shows how ingeniously Maimonides did his harmonizing between two irreconcilable traditions. We'll just read it in the English. It is Mitzvah 34 of the positive commandments. It is the commandment to the priests to carry the ark on their shoulders when we went to remove it from place to place. And that is his saying, they bore it on their shoulders. Number 7-9. Even though this command came to the Levites at that time, that was in fact because of the paucity at that time of priests who were actually obligated with the commandment. If so, the commandment is obligatory on the priests, and they would be the ones to carry it, as is made clear in the book of Joshua and in the book of Samuel. And when David commanded the ark be carried the second time, he said in Chronicles, the sons of Levi carried the ark on poles on their shoulders, as Moshe had commanded, in accordance with the word of the Lord. And likewise, when it mentions the divisions of the priests into 24 watches in Chronicles, it says, etc., etc., etc. So the Rambam is here in great trouble because he says the answer is that originally there were very few priests. There was only Aaron and his 4 sons. That was it. And therefore, the duty of carrying the ark was given to the Levites. But that was a temporary measure. But once there were enough priests to take care of it, then it became the duty of the priests. As I said, a very ingenious harmonization, but it doesn't work because the Rambam himself quotes from Chronicles where it says the sons of Levi carried the ark. But he explains the sons of Levi, it means the priestly sons, because the priests are also supposedly descended from Levi. So that's how he explains it. So, because they shouldn't be carrying it in the time of King David. According to the Maimonidean theory, it was only in the earliest days, because, as he says, because of the paucity of priests. But in the time of King David, there were plenty of Levites and plenty of priests. So, who should be carrying it now? Levites should be out of the picture, but they're not. So, the Rambam tried his best to reconcile, but again, it worked no better than the one we saw before, telling us the second set of tablets had on it a different version of the Decalogue. Now the last question. How was it understood? What was the significance of the ark? This is probably the most difficult part. First source, Numbers 10:33. Then they journeyed from the mountain of the Lord a way of 3 days, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord journeyed ahead of them a way of 3 days to find them a place to rest. What does it mean? The ark is a person, that he could find them a place to rest. So as you know, modern commentators are pretty much unanimous, and they say, well, we already heard that the Levites or the priests, whoever, carried the ark. So this contingent went ahead and they scouted out the way, and the words Aron Habrit Hashem Nosea doesn't mean that the ark itself grew feet and walked ahead of them. Of course not. It means it was carried. Well, this is a poetic way of speaking. And so they sent out a scouting party ahead of them, 3 days ahead, so they could find the best way to go. They had to find oases. Probably they had Yitro, one of his family, as a guide, as we read or will read in the book of Numbers. Please come with us and be our guide. You know the way in the wilderness better than we do. And the ark was carried with them as a vanguard. Not a problem. It did have to do with battles, because that's 1444. They went recklessly on their way. These people were called the Mapilim, towards the heights of the hill country, though neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses moved out of the camp. It's a very important verse. Why does it tell us that Moses and the ark did not move? Normally, it's implying that when they went to battle, the ark would go with them. Fairly obvious implication. So that fits in what we saw before. Latur lahem menucha, to find them the easiest way to travel. Now everyone agrees with this. Many people say the word menucha doesn't sound at all like battle. It sounds as though perhaps they believed that the ark had some power. And this is what we're going to come to now. And why did they take it into battle? That begs the question. If you follow those commentators who say that 3 days' journey ahead was preparing for battle, and then they use the second source where it says the ark and Moses did not leave the camp, even though it would have been normal to take the ark into battle, they didn't. But why, in the first place, would the ark go into battle? So we will see more of that as we go on. And I think it will tell us a lot about how it was understood in the earliest period. Now, there was a battle with Midian in chapter 31 of Numbers. And there it says, Moses sent them 1,000 from each tribe to the army, them and Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, to the army with the holy vessels and the trumpets that give signals into the battle. What does the holy vessels denote? It's the plural, holy vessels. What is it? So Rashi says, Kelei HaKodesh ze ha'aron ve'hatzitz. This refers to the ark and the gold plate which was on the forehead of the high priest. Well, everyone has a problem with this Rashi's second identification, because that gold plate was only for the high priest, and Phinehas was certainly not the high priest because his father was still living. And we know this because later in the story, Phinehas's father steps forward and talks to the people. So he's very much alive and kicking. So Phineas had no business wearing the tzitz. Or what was he doing there? It was on the forehead of his father in the temple, or in the sanctuary. So why Rashi mentioned the tzitz is very hard to comprehend. But the super commentaries tell you, well, Aron, he identified because we see elsewhere that the ark was taken into battle. This was usual. But since it says kele in the plural, he had to add something. So what are you going to add besides the ark? So he threw in the tzitz, maybe. Now we come to the real battle scenes. The Philistines drew up their lines facing the Israelites. And when they joined battle, the Israelites were routed by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field. When the army got back to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord let us be routed today by the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to go with us and deliver us from the power of our enemies." The words in the Hebrew are very important. Let it come into our midst and save us from our enemies. In other words, they believed that the ark had some sort of magical power, if you like. I'm not going into the vast literature which speculates as to how the ark was viewed in early days, but most of them think that it was in the days when the Israelites were still monolatrous. They were not really monotheistic, and the popular view was that magic was very welcome and acceptable, just as we find it today in many circles. So we should not sit here judging the ancients. They were better than we are, as you'll see as the story goes on. But that seems to have been a common belief. And that's why they took it into battle, thinking it had this power. As you see, deliver us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh and fetched the ark of the covenant. With it came the two sons of Eli, of course, because they were priests, so they were with the ark, and they presumably carried it. When the ark came into the camp, all the Israelites greeted it with a great shout, and the earth rang with the shouting. Philistines heard the noise and asked, "What is this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews?" When they knew that it was the ark of the Lord that had come into the camp, they were afraid and cried, "A god has come into the camp. We are lost. No such thing has ever happened before. We are utterly lost. Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the very gods who broke the Egyptians and crushed them in the wilderness. Courage, Philistines, and act like men, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews, as they were yours. Be men and fight." Philistines then gave battle. The Israelites were defeated and fled to their homes. It was a great defeat, and 30,000 Israelite foot soldiers perished. The ark of God was taken, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were killed. It may have been a defeat in the physical sense, but this was one of the great triumphs of the faith. Then they understood that the ark does not help you, and that after the ark came, they lost 30,000, before they'd lost only 4,000. And we can see how at that moment, this halo that surrounded the ark was gone forever. Never again was it taken out into battle. That role was over. So it just becomes an article, a symbolic item. This was as great a triumph as the breaking of the tablets. And in fact, the Torah is dotted with these stories, which give us an inkling of what was going on, of the huge tensions. And how was the war against idolatry won? By exposing its false claims. Aron cannot help you. You may be better off without it. The tablets were smashed by Moses. There's no magic here. They're just stones. These were the two most important events up to this period. Without them, we wouldn't be here today, because we would still have gone on believing in all the magic. Yes, it came back again, unfortunately, in our day, and it's roaring and rampaging all around us. But we still have these texts that enable us to stand up to it, to tell people, yes, we know, once upon a time, Mitehila of the Avodah Zarah hayu avotenu. But the Torah has also empowered us in a real sense, not the power given by a wooden casket, but the real power to overcome. I think we're running out of time. I'm not sure if we can finish. Do we have time for the next two sources? They're very complicated. I think we should leave them.
Yes, no, go.
Yes, just continue.
Torah Tzibur.
No. It's evening. There's no Torah Tzibur. We're all at home. Nobody has to drive home.
Or alternatively stated, leaving us with a cliffhanger is a Torah Tzibur.
Well, anyway, that will be the case, because there are many things that we couldn't get to tonight, and I'm sure everyone has lots of questions still. Now, at a later stage, and we meet the story of the ark, where it was at in the Haftarah of last week, because this passage forms part of the Haftarah. David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baalat, Judah. That's a place in Judea, as it was called later, and its other name was Kiryat Ye'arim. Why did it have two names? Many theories. Some say that the Baalat had to do with the Baal, was worshipped there. That's why it was called Baalat Yehuda. In the Hebrew, it says Baalei Yehuda, but in Chronicles, it says Baalat Yehuda. And also in the book of Joshua, where it says the Baalat Yehuda is Kiryat Ye'arim. So maybe Kiryat Ye'arim was considered a more appropriate name because it didn't have Baal in it. It's very possible, but we don't know for sure. Anyway, this was a town where they went to fetch the Aron, to take it up to a new address. They mounted the ark of God on a new cart and conveyed it from the house of Abinadab on the hill, with Uzzah and Achio, sons of Abinadab, guiding the cart. So the ark had been in a private house of an important man called Abinadab. That's where it was housed. Meantime, David had prepared a kind of sanctuary in his city of David, and he thought that this would be appropriate to have the ark come to him in his new, we can't call it a town, it's called the city of David, so let's leave it at that. They took it with the ark of God upon it from Abinadab's house on the hill. with Achior walking in front. David and all Israel danced for joy before the Lord without restraint to the sound of singing, harps and lutes, tambourines and castanets and cymbals. When they came to a certain threshing floor, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it. The Lord was angry with Uzzah and struck him down there for his rash act. So he died there beside the ark of God. David was vexed because the Lord's anger had broken out upon Uzzah, and he called the place Peretz Uzzah. The name it still bears. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can I harbor the ark of the Lord after this?" He felt he could not take the ark with him to the city of David, but turned aside and carried it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Thus, the ark of the Lord remained at Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his family. Again, we see here that the old superstition still lingered for a bit. In spite of what had happened earlier on, they were not done with it. And when Uzzah died, they thought that it was the power of the ark that had killed him. But the verse says very clearly, God intervened and was angry and put him to death, not the ark. But King David was not sure and thought maybe, after all, this ark lived happily in the house of Abinadab, no problems. After the incident with Uzzah, which made him very vexed, as you see, because he didn't think that such an innocent act deserved such punishment. Well, everything they thought of as reward and punishment, that was their problem. For all we know, it was an accident, or it was a miracle, a divine intervention. Either way, the ark had no power, no magical or occult power to kill people. Then what happened? Why did he take it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite? King David had been very friendly, as you know, although he had wars with the Philistines, but he also made many friends among them. Gath was one of the cities of the Philistines, and according to the Talmud, these were all converts. There was another one called Ittai Haggiti. He was surrounded by Philistines. Also, his most trusted servants, or you might say advisors, were the Kereti and Peleti. The Kereti came from Keretim, and the Peleti were the Philistines. And these were his trusted advisors. And he was great friends with Abimelech, as we know, to a certain period. So it's a very curious dichotomous relationship David had with the Philistines. Officially, they were at war, but he had personal friends among some of the Philistines, and according to the rabbis, quite a few of them converted and became part of his confidential circle. So this is one of them, and perhaps King David knew that he was not superstitious and he would welcome the honor of having the ark. And what happened? Did he die? He was blessed. Blessing came to his house because of the ark. So when David heard about this, 3 months later, he decided, well, maybe I was wrong to be superstitious. Maybe the ark doesn't do one any harm. Let me take it to the city of David. So after 3 months, he did. And the rest we know because it's all described very fully in the second half of last week's Haftarah. So we can see the understanding of the ark is evolving. But Jeremiah didn't think that the true faith could flourish as long as people hankered after the ark. It was still an impediment because of its history, because so many times people had believed in it and ascribed all kinds of power to it. You know, there is a parallel story. Moses made a bronze serpent and set it up in the wilderness, and it was a relic. And in the time of Hezekiah, people were worshipping it. And the Bible says, because of this, Hezekiah destroyed it, put an end to it. Because however understandable it is that people had a nostalgic attachment to this Mosaic relic, if it gets in the way of a higher claim, then you have to be able to say goodbye to it. And that's what Hezekiah did. And Aron probably had the same function as the Nachash Nechoshet. It started off innocently because Moses had good thoughts and never dreamt such a thing could happen, but it did. And so the bronze serpent went, and now Jeremiah says that Aron has to go as well. In those days, when you have increased and become fruitful in the land, says the Lord, men shall speak no more of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. They shall not think of it, nor remember it, nor resort to it. It will be needed no more. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord. All nations shall gather in Jerusalem to honor the Lord's name. Never again shall they follow the promptings of their evil and stubborn hearts. So he sees a restoration can only happen when the ark is removed. And he doesn't want it even to be remembered. Maybe we are being disobedient by remembering it. But in a way, his words, if we had no other words, we would still know there was once an ark and that people venerated it and that Jeremiah said it has to go. Next time, we will ask the great question, what really happened to the ark? Was Jeremiah successful in his own day to have it removed once and for all? Question mark. I will not say that we have an answer, but this question will be considered next time, God willing.